Thank you guys for all having us tonight. My name is Matt Gilfillan. I am the Vice President of the Board of Education, and I, for 3 years, have now been the head of the Facility and Finance Committee. For all you policemen out there, I drive a 2003 Chevy Tahoe, so if you might see me speeding, I hope you guys will recognize me going forward. Tonight we're here to talk about two things. One is a look at our annual operating budget, as well as a referendum that is going to be voted on as part of our annual operating budget plan, which is set for April the 21st. This year we're actually, because of the referendum, we are extending our voting hours. We are going to be from 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. Generally speaking, in the past we've only gone from 2 p.m. To around 9 p.m. at night. So with the fact we're offering up a referendum, we thought it was important that we extend the times that the electorate can get out there and cast their votes. From a operating perspective, the way that we step back every year and look at what we're trying to do, we kind of have three main goals. One is to maintain the district programs at a level of excellence. As you all know, over the last year, Chatham school system was ranked the #1 school system in New Jersey. Generally speaking, we will bounce around, but while desiring the #1, we basically believe can change every year, but hope to stay in that top 10, of course, with that goal for #1. A big thing that we look at, of course, is the maintenance of the current class sizes. I would say the #1 priority of the parents in our town is maintenance of small classes, and then finally is to deliver a budget at the lowest possible cost to the taxpayers while maintaining the level of excellence that we've achieved in town. How do we compare to everybody that is in our, what we call our J district, which is basically who do we compare ourselves against to across the state. The state average in terms of on a per pupil basis is $14,783. Now these are figures that are released by the state. The Chatham per pupil budgetary cost is a little less than $13,000 at $12,954. If you can look at what we do in terms of the excellence of our students, we can also compare that to then the AP participation rate across the state, and you can look at Chatham's participation rate of over 70% in the districts that we really compete against in terms of excellence. In Millburn, we're 8% above Millburn. We are, 25% above Westfield. And a little bit above Summit. So the AP participation rate is something that we strive for. What's fantastic about what we do from a curricular perspective is we're able to do that at a significantly lower cost than our competitive school districts. How do we do in terms of Morris County? Again, we are near the bottom. Mountain Lakes, I believe that one, I'm quite sure why it's NA, I believe it's above $18,000. Boonton at $17,700. Kinnelon at $14,800, and Chatham again once down below $13,000. Once again, on a competitive basis, Chatham is ranked the #1 school in New Jersey, so we pride ourselves doing it on less money. If you look at our overall aid perspective and what we're capable of doing in terms of the new rules that were put in place by Governor Christie a number of, 4 years ago, which was a 2% tax cap, our state aid is flat. The district qualifies for basically what we could go up and above that 2% factor of $183,000. If we wanted to, we could go out and ask for a 2.3% legally and ask for an additional $1.338 million this year over last year. If you look at it from a perspective of how we handle it now and how we look at our tax increases and how we look at what we're trying to do in terms of what we're asking from the electorate, we've made a conscious decision now is that going forward, we ask for an operating budget, and then if we have any issues that the town or the electorate is asking for from a curricular perspective, anything that's kind of additional cost outside of what we call turning on the lights, we do ask the public to vote on that. So over the last couple years, we've had the primary vote, which is your operating budget, and then you have second questions. 2 years ago was, one second question was the security personnel at the situation in Connecticut, and then the school counseling staff. So our electorate had 3 questions on that. They had a operating tax increase, then they had a budget as to whether or not they wanted to pass extra dollars for the counseling staff and extra dollars for the security personnel. Last year, our second question was all around STEM staff as well as STEM resources. So we think it's the prudent thing to do is create an operating budget that keeps the lights on And then if we want to add programs, we want to make sure that the public gets to vote on that as to whether or not they think that's a priority as well. As you can see, over the last 2 years, we had a 3.4% tax increase 2 years ago, and last year was 3.34%. This is an overview of our expenditures. As you would imagine, the biggest cost we have is wages and benefits. It is a little bit quirky. As you look at it, you might see total expenditures down in the bottom. It appears on that we actually have gone down in terms of our overall spend from 15 into 16. That's basically due to the fact we're accounting for a decrease in we took money out from capital reserve in order to build the new 7 classrooms at the high school. This is our overview in terms of what we look for a tax increase for this year and what we're going to the electorate with. In 2014-15, as we said, we were at 3.34% ask. That passed at a 72% rate. This year, we are down at 1.77% ask. If you look at that from a perspective of what it costs on a individual basis, I don't know, and I can't honestly explain how it changes in terms of who bears the brunt of the increase in taxes between the borough and the township. But on a estimated tax impact of $100,000 of assessed value, that 1.77% in the borough is $15.23 of additional ask, and the township is $27.95. We look at the total impact, and we base that upon an average figure for the borough and the township, which is right around $700,000 per home, a little bit less, and I think in the borough, a little more in the township. So on an overall basis, if your house is worth $700,000, the education portion of your tax bill will go up by $106.62, and then $195.67 in the township. Looking back over the years, from a tax perspective, sadly enough, I don't even remember back to the 05-06 years, but we had some significant tax increases over time, 05 and 06 at 6.8%, 07 and 08 at 8.2%. We are now, over the last couple of years, we have been impacted by the 2% cap tax from Mr. Christie. And in 12 and 13, I don't believe we had any second questions. So that was just purely from an operating basis. And then 14 and 15 reflect not only the operating, but also the second questions. So from a levy comparison, if you compare it to last year, we're about 41% below what we asked for from the electorate last year, and once again, it did pass by a 72-28 vote. In terms of what our authority, what we're allowed to do as a district is we're allowed to, in essence, bank a tax increase. So if we don't use it this year, we can actually flow that forward to the next year. So this will allow us next year additional dollars to ask for from a budgetary perspective. I will tell you right now, the real wild card in terms of our budgets is healthcare benefits. And if we see a significant increase in healthcare benefits next year, while we strive at that 2% figure, we may have to ask for more. Legally speaking, we're allowed next year to ask for 2% plus that 313, which I think I'll get to around a 2.5 maybe, somewhere around there. Because of that, anything above that, once again, we will go to a second question. I can tell you right now from the perspective of the Finance Committee is that if we can get through the operating budget this year and the referendum, is that there will be little appetite to focus on anything over the next couple of years in terms of tax increases outside of operating. So we will strive to do our best is to make sure that the operating budget is as tight as possible for the next number of years as we digest this year's ask. What we've also done, and moving into the referendum, is that there is what's called ESIP programs, which are Energy Savings Investment Plans. They are what they call NJPL 2009 Chapter law, allows local government agencies to make energy-related improvements to their facilities, pay for the improvements using the value of the energy savings, and then finance the improvements outside of the operating budget and tax levy. So what that means is we can go and we can work with an entity that specializes in energy controls, and we can go into an agreement whereby they actually, in essence, upfront capital dollars to us, and the way we return those capital dollars is through payments through the reduction in overall costs within the district. So if say we produce $4 million in capital investment, and they guarantee us that we'll save $350,000 a year. We pay for that capital improvements by, in essence, handing over that savings back to that, I'll call it a financing entity. Right now, we have selected a provider in Honeywell. I do not know the final figures, but it is a significant amount of dollars into the district for us to run through a number of significant capital investment upgrades, including windows and roofs and new boilers. Basically everything that we've had in terms of a wish list for the number of years that we have not been able to pay for out of operating. The next step we're doing is a referendum. The referendum from a all-in perspective is $24.8 million on a gross basis, with the fact that we get benefit from the state for interest rate relief, interest payment relief. The number net is 21.8, I believe, net figure. If you look at it from a perspective of what we've done over the years, we did have referendums in 1995 and 2005. They've all focused on the classrooms, athletic facilities, as well as the libraries. Over the last 10 years, all the capital improvements have been funded through the operating budget. We've been able to add 11 classrooms at the high school to deal with significant student body growth, all out of operating budget. We've been able to resurface the fields at Cougar and Haas, all out of the operating budget. And the enrollment figures that we have is we're going to continue to grow all the way through, I believe our peak year is 2021. So we still have significant number of students to deal with. From a total district perspective, the peak enrollment, I believe, is right around 4,300. If you look at it from a perspective right now of what we used to be and where we are now, is I believe in the old days we kind of felt that a normal class size was about 200. The normal class size that we factor in terms of all of our long-term planning is 300 kids per class. And Chatham, because of the school district that it is, has a significant amount of people that move in. Our birth rates in Chatham are very low. If we went by our birth rate in terms of our demography report, we have about 180 births a year for people that actually live in Chatham. So the number of people that move in every year, and we factor in, because I think of the overall taxes as well as the school district, as we believe that the number going forward is around 300 kids a class, which gives us an overall student body of right around just below 4,000 kids. If you can imagine, 20 years ago, the district was 2,400. So what are our goals in terms of what we're doing from a referendum perspective? I can tell you from over the years is that the Finance and Facility and the Board of Ed has fought any thought of a referendum. We didn't think that the environment from an economic perspective was the right time. We didn't think that that there was other priorities that we needed to get through. And then once we addressed them through either from an operating side or from the past referendums, we basically decided at that point is that we needed to focus on the arts. And we looked at this and started this around 4 years ago. We looked at alternative financing mechanisms. We looked at all different kinds of things that we could do, from rebuilding existing plant, from building a new facility and try to doing that through an operating budget plan, and from alternative financing mechanisms. But what was clear to us is from the feedback we were getting from all the different arts communities and in town is that we need to do something about the arts. And we kind of took a step back and decided that we've addressed all the issues from a classroom perspective. We've done a lot in terms of the curricular perspective. So we needed to take that next step and really focus on the arts. So what the goals were and what we're trying to do. One is looking at the inadequacy of the district's two auditoriums. One was built in 1958 and the second in 1976. We needed to create more space for STEM classrooms in order to meet the growth in that. I would say from a curricular perspective, in the parental perspective, the number one thing they're looking for is additional STEM classes. We needed to, and what we wanted to do is add classrooms at the elementary level to relieve pressure from enrollment growth. We needed to address the aging infrastructure in the athletic complexes at Cougar and the high school. We've had significant number of complaints with the bleachers at Cougar. We've had some incidents that we could deem dangerous, and there's been a lot of asks and pressure from the community to take care of that and make it a better and a safer environment, particularly for the youth as well as the seniors. And then we're looking to incorporate the district offices down into district property. We actually believe it's better for the district if we have those offices actually down closer to where the action is, which is that middle school area. So what are we doing? We're looking to build a new auditorium at the Chatham Middle School that will service the district as a whole. We look to convert the existing Chatham Middle School auditorium into STEM labs and district offices as well as flexible space. We're looking to renovate the existing high school auditorium, build 6 new elementary classrooms, install turf fields behind the high school in order to deal with issues for the baseball, the softball program, and in the fall we'll have additional space for the marching band as well as field hockey and soccer, and then upgrade the Cougar field infrastructure. If you look at this from the total project scope perspective, I feel, and you can give you guys the history of what we were trying to do. We've been, as I said, adamant about no referendum, and when we finally decided, okay, because of the environment from an interest rate perspective, the environment from the 95 referendum coming off, is that we allowed the administration at that point to go ahead and tell us what it would cost to purely focus on an arts facility. And we had a budget number in line that we felt we would be comfortable with in asking the public to move forward with from a pure referendum perspective. When the numbers came back to us, we were actually relatively shocked at how low that figure was. So at that point, with the fact we had the ESIP program going on, that was able to really go after a lot of the different infrastructure projects that we knew we had to tackle, most importantly things like boiler systems. As we went back and said, okay, if we were going to have the opportunity to upgrade all of the issues in all of the facilities in town that everybody keeps asking us about, let's look at what that total cost figure is. And if we can bring those figures inside of what our original budget was, what we felt comfortable with asking the public for, we would move forward with that. So from that, we were able to meet actually and be significantly below the total ask that we were comfortable with, which is why we decided to go forward with a complete upgrade of all the issues that we felt from a district-wide perspective. The auditorium facilities. A lot of people are asking us about this. It is actually not feasible for us to, from a financial perspective or from a building perspective, to expand the high school or the middle school auditoriums. We can't do it from a footprint perspective. The high school is basically done with in terms of expansion on footprint. The costs were actually much more prohibitive than we thought. It's almost in line with what we would have to spend to build a new auditorium, to rebuild the high school and the middle school auditoriums. The only problem with that is we don't get what we need in terms of a facility. There's nothing that we could have done at the high school or the middle school that would have brought a facility up to the standard that not only do our arts students expect from us, but we think is proper for the art students in Chatham. The number one thing overall at the high school, middle school is we would have to make it ADA compliant. So the moment that you go in and touch a facility, you have to make that ADA compliant. And we would have lost significant amount of seating capacity at each one of the facilities. Again, we're back to inadequate storage, set building, dressing room. So, there's more to a play than simply what you see on the stage. There's so much more that goes on behind it. And I will tell you from listening to the children when they come in and talk to us about being on set crew and lighting crew, is that you don't realize how many kids it takes to put on a production. And right now the facilities just aren't there in order for that to be an adequate program for the kids outside of the performers. So we went and we looked at it and decided whether or not is it the right thing to do to try to manipulate what we have, or is it better to go build something new. We took a lot of advice from all the different arts programs. We took advice from the parents. We took advice from performing art groups, etc. And the decision was made at that point that renovating was not going to be cheaper, it wasn't going to be better, it wasn't going to deliver, so we had to focus on a new facility. From an academic perspective, the district has expanded its STEM program. Last year, as a second question, we added significant amount of spend. We need more facilities now in order to put that spend into a more adequate facility space. If you look at it from our overall student lab ratio, where we have an enrollment from our tech labs, we are basically well under what we need in terms of delivering a successful product to the children of Chatham. The elementary buildings, they're tight. We're adding 6 classrooms. Basically, it's a net gain of 2 classrooms at each of the elementary schools. This is something that the principals and the teachers have been asking for years, which is increased flexibility in terms of classroom space at each one of these facilities. The The athletic facilities, as we said before, Cougar, significantly aging infrastructure, from the bleachers to the fencing to the press box. Parking is not well designed. Anyone who drives in there, you guys know it's a bomb field. You can always drive into some kind of hole, so we're looking to upgrade that as well. And due to the fact that we've got a significantly growing sport, and this is for Mike LaSousa's dear to heart, is we are dramatically expanding our running program from not only cross country and track, not only from the high school perspective, but moving that down the ladder into middle school. And then we're going to have for the public community a cinder path that could act as a course for cross country, as well as use by the residents of Chatham around the facility. The high school fields, they've been beaten up. We've had a lot of asks for us to continue to upgrade all the different facilities. They don't properly drain, et cetera. Fields right now, I don't know if you've all seen, but we've had a difficulty in getting the kids on the fields, even with all this turf, because of all the snow. So in essence, the better facilities we can put up and the more facilities we can put up for the kids, the easier it is to get them on the fields and get them to a competitive level that they need to be. There's the overall cost. The cost estimates for all the improvements is $24.8 million. The state debt service is $2.9, and the local share is $21.9 million. So that 24.8 is a gross figure, 21.9 million is a net figure. In terms of what the tax impact it will be, even though we're going to ask on a referendum for 24.8, the tax impact to the residents of Chatham is actually $21.9 million. The district also just refunded a current debt from a previous referendum from 2005 that's going to save over the next 10 years $3.8 million. There's been a lot of questions in terms of the operating costs. The projected estimated annual operating cost for the new auditorium is around $40,000. The projected savings from moving the offices from here down to the district is around 85 to 100. That's broken down with around $50,000 or so in rent and then $50,000 in expenses. And then from an annual operating cost, basically, will be a net positive to the district. If you look at it from why we also thought now, we focused on interest rates. If you can go back to 2005, where we asked for a larger total referendum, you can see from an interest and a taxable perspective on a per $100,000 of assessment. Back then in the borough was $71. That's now flipped. Township 57. This year, that tax impact is right around $25 when all is said and done. So if you look at it from a tax impact perspective, Chatham Borough on a $100,000 of assessed value is $25.43. The annual tax impact for a average home of $700,000 is $178. Township is 24.56 with a impact of $171.91 per average house. If you looked at this from a monthly perspective, it's around $25 a month and a little over $2 for each of the two towns. Referendum from a logistical standpoint, right now the location of the new auditorium makes most sense to us to have it down in that circle right in front of the middle school. It's actually the least disruptive from an educational standpoint. We've done a lot of work with the architect to make sure that there's a minimal impact if this project were to move forward. Right now, from a logistics perspective, most of the high school athletes already practice and compete off-site, so we believe we have all the plans in place in order to make sure that this system would work efficiently and effectively as well. And the location of the new district offices would be a dramatic improvement, we believe, from an organizational standpoint. Right now, there is a lot of oversight and a lot of meetings that occur down into schools. If we can shorten that distance, we believe it works well for the administration. From an aesthetic standpoint, the new auditorium entrance would give we believe is a pretty nice dramatic redesign of the middle school. We have shown what we believe it could look like. We have not finalized that design, but ones we have seen are pretty exciting. They're really meant to be not just an auditorium for the school district. It's meant to be a community-wide auditorium. It's set up to have outdoor concerts in the summertime. So it's a really neat facility that we believe can get a lot of play by not only the district but also the residents of Chatham. As from a timeline perspective, if the referendum were approved, The district would work with its architect on a timeline that ensured the availability of at least one auditorium throughout construction. The calendar is March 31st is the deadline for voter registration. April 21st is the vote by mail applications must be received by the County Board of Elections. And then once, as we said before, the April 21st dates from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. at the middle school and the high school. I would imagine we're going to have to put out instructions to the residents of Chatham to deal with the fact that kids are in school up until around 2 o'clock that time in order to deal with that effectively from a logistical standpoint to make sure that there's space to get in and vote. So you know the structure of the vote. I'm not quite sure what it will look like on there, but you will have 2 chances to vote. 1 will be the operating, 2 will be the Board of Ed member election, and then 3 will be the vote on the actual referendum itself. And with that, I can open it up to questions.
To the committee.
To the committee, sorry.
Very good. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. The only thing, well, a few things that I wanted to touch on. First is just to set the record straight, because we've had a couple of inquiries and we've had a couple of emails, and that is, what does the township charge from a rent perspective? The township charges $52,500 a year from a rent perspective, and your share of custodial fees and utilities, a little under $7,000. So that has been a question. I know this number 100,000 has been thrown around, and that may deal with other issues that you may have, but from a perspective of what the township is charging, it's $52,500 a year. And I have no idea how many square feet you have, but on a per month basis, sounds like a pretty good deal. And the other issue that has been asked or raised, as someone has mentioned, that this building is for sale. And this building is not for sale at the present time, although our town administrator, Mr. Chiccarone, would say, well, everyone has a price. The question was raised, obviously, because if you move out, we'd have a building, a rather sizable building, that would be half empty. And we already have probably more space than we need. But I just wanted to let everyone know that at the present time, there is no, we're not in a rush to sell the building. We're not looking to sell the building at the present moment. It's been a discussion item in general conversation that some point, maybe down the road, that might have to be looked at if the referendum went through and we did not find another tenant. So I just wanted to point that out for the record. And I don't know if you want to address the other costs of
Sure.
that 100,000 figure.
Sure, and I'll say, of course, we greatly appreciate the hospitality here in the Township building. Greg and Tom are terrific. We have about $50,000 in rent, and another $5,000 or so in custodial and other costs. We end up paying a significant sum, over $2,000 a month, for internet and broadband, because we have to run such heavy data management systems with the student information system that we have. So that's the bulk of the cost that gets us up between 85 and 100. And then on top of that, we have other costs, like we run our mail truck out here. All of our other properties, by the way, all the other schools and special services, we own the fiber optic network underground for those buildings. So if we move to a site that was district property, all of those kinds of costs would go away. And then there are some other costs in addition, like our supervisor of maintenance comes out about once a week for a meeting, and those sorts of soft costs that we have in there, they put us somewhere between 85 and 100.
Right, thank you. And just from a perspective of when we look at a project, our engineer, John Rushke, is not here tonight. If he's bidding something, he usually looks at some room of a buffer. He has a general idea what the project is going to cost. He might factor in 10% roughly for overcost. If it comes in significantly higher, then we've looked at it wrong. Looking at this referendum, looking at the not so much the fields, but certainly the Performing Arts Center, a very big number. How much buffer and what ability do you have? From our perspective, if we come up short, obviously we can rebond. Dealing with a referendum, how much buffer is in there? If you come in under, what happens? If you come over, obviously, how would you adjust to handle that?
Well, built in is a 10% contingency factor. And the way that, I'd imagine it probably works the same way with you guys, is that when we put out proposals and bid for proposals, we get a number of back. Generally speaking, anything we've done, we've seen anywhere from 15 to 20 proposals come back. We, by law, have to go with the lowest bid. We don't get to look at the history. We don't get to look at recommendations. Basically, each one of the people that are allowed to bid on these facilities or the construction of these facilities are on a quote-unquote approval list. So they are checked by, I don't know if it's a state or a county group that manages the oversight of that. So we have to go with the lowest bid. And from that point, we do, built into each of these bids, from the architect standpoint, is a 10% contingency fee, which generally speaking has been pretty good in terms of all the different projects that we've done over the last 4 to 5 years, from the parking lot to all the different classrooms. If you remember, 2 years ago, we do have insurance against this. 2 years ago, we were building classrooms at the high school, and the builder, who was the lowest bid, also at that point decided halfway through to go into bankruptcy. At that point, it's the insurance company takes over, and they guarantee the construction of that up to that budgetary point. So there was no at-risk for the district. Historically, I've never seen us go over. I don't know 100% if they do go over.
Well,
That goes back to the insurance company.
we don't have the authority to borrow more money. The referendum is the authority to borrow money to that amount. So if we end up going over, we either have to redesign the project or we have to find operating money somehow to offset whatever the difference is. But our current architect of record we've been working with for about 4 years. Like Matt said, we've done several projects with this group. It's a pretty well-known, well-established group in New Jersey for public school construction, and they've been on target for all of the projects that we've had.
Thank you. Open it up to the committee. Other questions?
Mr. Kelly?
I was wondering if you could help me out on the 85,000 to 100,000 savings in moving to offices within the middle school. Because it kind of builds on the question that the mayor had, but I follow the argument that you're now paying close to 100,000 to operate for rent and for operations here in this building. And that would go away if you move to the middle school. But if it costs you, and I think the slides from previous demonstrations have been $3.4 million to renovate the middle school auditorium, half of which would be space for the school offices. So just looking at it from the outside as a layman, if half of 3.4 million is somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million to build new space, then how is there a savings of $100,000 a year? Because
There's no, in essence, savings is probably a bad term. Basically, it's a reallocation of capital at that point. So instead of in our operating budget paying for this facility, which is 85 to 100, that capital will be reallocated down towards operating in the new facility, as well as the operational costs that are associated with the changes that are made at the middle school auditorium. So if you look at it, we kind of did the estimates, and the figures right around, I believe, $40,000 in operating costs that we would take on at the middle school from a new auditorium, and then the balance of that addresses operating costs that are increasing in the balance of the facility. So it's not really a cost saving; it's a reallocation of operating costs.
Let me just jump in and answer that slightly differently. So the total price tag is 3.4 for the conversion. 1.4 will be paid for by the state. It's this particular portion of the project in the referendum receives the greatest amount of state funding because both finding a permanent home for district offices qualifies for 40% state funding, and building new classrooms, in this instance at the middle school, qualifies for state funding. So the number drops down to $2 million total cost. So then if you cut that in half and say half of it's going to be classrooms, half of it will be office space, you're closer to $1 million. The savings that we get, like Matt said, we'll use some of that to pay for the additional square footage that we have at the middle school. But ultimately, when we pay off the bond in 20 years, the payments will go away from a tax levy perspective. So we would be saving over time. Once we hit that $1 million that we're bonding to build that portion of the project, that eventually is it matures.
So in reality, it's much more complicated than saying that you're saving $85,000 to $100,000. In reality, the construction costs and the bonding of the construction costs over 20 years on the interest are pretty much a wash to what you're saving over here. Then on top of that, you have maintenance costs down at the middle school that you really don't have in a rented facility. And on top of that, you have the fact that your $50,000 rent that's coming into the township now is $50,000 that township taxpayers don't have to pay to fund the municipal budget. So there's really a $50,000 a year cost to the Chatham Township portion of your constituents that is over and above everything else that's been said here.
True. You need to remember also is that the interest payments on this bond do not go into our operating budget.
Correct.
Right?
This is all shifting it from the operations to the,
Correct.
largely shifting it over to the bonding indebtedness.
Correct.
But it still comes out of the same pockets, the
Correct.
taxpayers' pockets.
Correct.
Okay, I couldn't follow the logic of the savings.
Savings is probably a bad word. But
But there is a
the
net
reallocation
savings.
of operating costs is a better terminology for that.
What is if it were to pass, what would be the time frame? Which class would have the benefit of the facilities?
It depends on which portion of the project you're talking about. So the fields would probably be able to be accomplished before most of the other construction. Based on our recent experience at the high school, the elementary classrooms, my guess would be ready to go either January or September of 2016. And depending on how we structure the rest of the construction, I would imagine, and don't hold us to this, but I would imagine we'd move forward with the high school auditorium first, because it's simpler, it's a leaner sort of refurbishment. We would hope to probably get that done within 6 months from the time we begin. And then after that point, we'd start working on the middle school auditorium most likely. So that would be the one furthest off in the distance, which would give the township the most notice, probably a good 2 to 3 years before we were able to vacate, assuming Mr. Chickalone doesn't sell the building before then.
Did he mention the lease breaking fee?
You just twisted my arm.
So it's about a 2 or 3 year, the performing arts actually is a 2 or 3 year project?
I'd say so, probably, for the new auditorium.
I want you to back up for a couple of years, because a couple of years ago, the communities were a very close call to pass the extra security personnel, and was around the town of the Newtown shootings.
We failed in the borough, passed in the township.
Right. Could you just take us through that? How is that played out in the school system, and any issues you have, and how has that been incorporated into the security and the evaluation of it at this point in time?
Sure. The principals are elated to have the security personnel in place. It makes their lives much easier in terms of trying to monitor who's coming in and out of the buildings. That's probably been the single biggest difference at our K through 8 buildings in particular. The high school is a larger facility, so that individual often is sort of moving around and dealing with other kinds of issues. But there's a central presence. The parent community knows the folks who are in the building. It importantly enables us to be able to group together as an administrative team without having to worry about the building being unsupervised or having our own meetings interrupted, especially when they're all the way up here, for principals to travel back to their buildings to deal with some kind of an issue. And then we've had some unusual circumstances that people don't think about. There was the suicide, unfortunately, near the Chatham Middle School, where we had a lot of activity. We had an evacuation just last week at the middle school, actually, while I was there for a presentation, and the whole building had to move over to the church for about an hour. So those kinds of issues that arise every now and again, the security personnel have been indispensable.
Yeah, I just want to commend you, Matt and Mike, for your efforts. I think the efforts you've done to put this, this referendum together, it's a lot of hard work. It's a long time overdue, I think, in terms of some of these facilities we're looking at. So I commend you for your hard work and your efforts in really communicating this and getting out to the public and getting people aware of what's going on and the importance of these issues. Question regarding the auditorium itself. You talked a little bit about how, during summertime, third parties might be able to come in. Has there been any thought in terms of how this auditorium might be utilized outside of the school district itself?
We've already had at least one group come to us and say that they would be a large user of the facility and pay a significant amount of rental dollars into the district over an annual basis. There's a lot of opportunities with all the dance groups in the local area to rent the facility out. For that, we've seen ability with the size of the facility that we could have host concerts during the summertime. So there is significant amount of traction and requests already that have come in with a facility like this to rent that facility to increase and driving a revenue from that.
So it would be a true community type auditorium?
It is meant to be, and we would consider it to be, a community facility, not a district facility.
So people without children in the district actually would benefit from this as well?
Absolutely.
I've also spoken with a couple of other superintendents who have facilities like this in their districts. And one of them that isn't too far from here, last year they billed out upwards of $130,000 just to local groups that want to use the facility. They use that money to handle all operating expenses and have someone who coordinates and arranges venue, the scheduling of the venue, and then they take in the rest as miscellaneous expense to help in their budget.
Has there been any thought in terms of, obviously, our school district is ranked high very well, statewide, and it's all this recognition with all these additional amenities and facility upgrades, how that might play into future, analysis or surveys or studies that they do to acknowledge that, how great the school is?
Well, I'd imagine that people, when they come into towns, they not only look at the strength of the school system as well as the athletic system, but I think they'll also look at the strength of the arts. So I think we're actually adding a third leg to what we do in terms of we believe is maintenance and driving value in terms of the real estate in Chatham, which is giving a bigger platform for us to really promote the strength of the arts in Chatham. I don't know if you guys ever see the Board of Ed meetings, but I would say the biggest portion of that is always dedicated to what's going on from an arts perspective in town. We have an incredible band and singing and performing arts. It's truly a phenomenal program. What we don't have is a facility that meets up to the standards of the children that we have in this town in terms of overall ability. So I think at that point, it's another value driver for the community as well as the school system by really bringing up the facilities to a level that it needs to be, that we've already seen at the athletic side and we've already seen at the schools.
So in essence, you're kind of completing the package, as it were?
Yeah, perfectly.
And, the other benefit of building a new auditorium is that we can repurpose the space of the current auditorium. So the need for a greater amount and a greater diversity of STEM facilities at the middle school will help feed what we're doing at the high school right now.
That's going to be my other question. STEM is now kind of the terminology used in these recent years. When I was in the Education Foundation, that we were just dipping our toe in the water on this, and it's great to see that you guys are, addressing this issue. Do you want to talk any more about the increased popularity of STEM and the importance of having these facilities for students?
I think, to me, from a Board of Ed perspective, it's the recognition by the children in Chatham how important STEM is. 3 years ago, I was on the curricular committee, and I believe it was 3 years ago, maybe it was 4 years ago, but we had difficulty, and I think we canceled AP computer. And this year we're up to 2, and we're adding classrooms and adding facilities for AP computer. So I think it's a complete district-wide initiative that's being driven by the parents as well as what we're able to offer from a facility perspective that's really driving the kids into these STEM courses. If you look at it, where we need to be and what we need to have our kids prepared for in college, I think the more that we can do from that STEM perspective, the better our kids are going to look from a profile perspective as they apply to the top schools across the country. So there is massive amounts of focus, there is massive amounts of input from the townsfolk to continually upgrade not only from a curricular perspective, our STEM offerings, but also from a facility perspective.
Great. Well, again, I commend you for your efforts in, setting the stage and helping establish facilities and a platform from which our students can succeed.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. We are not eliminating the need to rent Menon Arena for high school graduation, are we?
No, we're not, probably not eliminating the need to rent Menon, although
We do it for middle school as well.
it wouldn't be an impossibility that we could consider having graduation back here for the high school. Our biggest issue with the high school right now is when we have room outside and we have bleachers that we can, put out there, and it's beautiful, as you know.
Been there and done that.
The problem is if it gets stormy,
Right.
we really don't have a suitable environment to relocate to. If we had a bigger auditorium with more seating, we could entertain, again, going back to a situation where we can bring people indoors. Right now, the middle school auditorium is our largest one. There's no air conditioning there. If we had a bigger facility with a stage that we could fit an entire class on, that was really the deal breaker for us. We had to bounce out of the auditorium because our class sizes have become too large. Then we could consider bringing it back. And we could also certainly bring back 8th grade graduation, which right now we have at Menon also.
I don't even know what it costs, but it seems to me to build a $10 million arena and still have to rent out larger facilities seems a little sort of contradictory. I know from following what the board has done and what the citizens of both the borough and the township are facing, there's been an awful lot of acrimony between the board and the letters to the editor that I see, and people parading in and out of the high school and trying to gin up the vote of potential 18-year-olds who will be 20-something and out of the district by the time they're spending their parents' tax dollars. So it bothers me a great deal seeing how divisive this issue is among our residents in our community, both the township and the borough. One reason that compelled me to seek office here in the township was the acrimony in our community. It's people yelling at each other all the time. And this is not news to you because you're obviously at all the meetings. And I don't know what can be done to bring this back to a civil discourse. But obviously, this is a real hot button issue and people are not seeing eye to eye on it at all. I know that one thing that we are trying to come to grips with is the whole idea of breaking it up into several different questions, which you claim will be pitting the arts against the athletics and so on. I'm wondering, when you talked about the vote, whether it was the 2014-15 budget, if I'm not mistaken, or the 13-14 budget, where you broke it into counseling and the security issue, were those two separate? So you have in the past broken down a referendum of this sort into a number of different questions. So in fact, the voters could have come and voted yes on security
But
and no on counseling?
Yeah, well, yes.
Yes,
But the
so
problem
it's been
is
done in the
that from a,
past, but we're not going
well,
to
from a facility
entertain that this
perspective,
time around.
from a facility perspective, you can't address it as a second question, right? So you can't ask for, if you're asking for operating dollars, because those operating dollars in essence become part of your baseline, that has to be asked through a second question. So
Right.
second questions are technically different than a referendum.
Right.
And the reason why we went forward one single question was, when we went into this whole process, it had nothing to do with sports, it had nothing to do with classrooms, it had nothing to do with Cougar, it had nothing to do with new baseball field, and nothing to do with anything in that. The only thing we were looking to address was the arts. And at that time, we had significant asks from the community to address all of the different infrastructure needs that we had. So from my perspective, and I think a lot of the board's perspective at that point, is that they could not see themselves moving forward with any package whereby we could see a classroom question pass, the athletics pass, and then the arts facility fail, because that was never the intention of what we were looking to do. The primary focus of this is and always has been the arts. From a financial perspective, it was deemed at that point that we were able to do this all within a dollar ask, as I said before, that we felt made sense. So at that point, because the focus was, and and where we wanted to be was the arts. We decided to move that forward with one question. At that point, if we had gone forward with 3 questions, I don't think that would have gone through the Board of Ed. I think we would have asked for 1 question, which was basically just on the arts. I don't think we would have offered up a possibility, as I said, whereby the fields or the classrooms could have passed and the arts failed, because that's not what the initial intent and focus of this whole referendum process was.
Well, with all due respect, I still feel as though the hostility that this has raised in the community is something that I really haven't witnessed since perhaps 1995, when we were young residents raising young families, and if that was the last time a school budget actually didn't pass, if I'm not mistaken.
Now, the school budget's passed every year since incorporation of the district.
And when was it that we actually voted, when the residents actually voted down a referendum?
That was 98.
1998.
That was a $39.7 million referendum. And the next year, the board came back with a $25 million referendum that did pass.
So there is the possibility of going back to the drawing board on this in April.
There is.
All right. In logistics, sorry I'm taking up a lot of time here. Logistics, I'm just wondering, Mr. Gilfillan, you were kind enough to present to the board of the senior center the other day, and I asked about the security of having people in and out of the school building during the school day, since you're expanding the voting hours, and how you've addressed the logistics of getting folks in and out. Obviously, you don't want strangers wandering in and out of open doors. School building.
Sure. Well, every year we've had an election at 2 p.m. when the polls
Right.
open. We've got strangers in the buildings. So what we typically do is we section off certain areas of parking so that our teachers and/or our students at the high school are parking in a separate area so that we've got as much parking as we can offer. Our security personnel actually are enormously helpful in this regard. And we typically will hire an additional substitute or 2 to help us just manage, the flow of traffic. I also just say in terms of the acrimony, as you might imagine, I was at the Kiwani Club a few months ago. I'm meeting with new parents tomorrow morning. I do a lot of presenting. I'm no stranger to the acrimony. When we had the security question right after Sandy Hook, I can tell you there was a lot of emotion directed at me, a lot of anger in both directions from people who wanted us to have armed officers, and this was nonsense if you're not arming all your people, including your teachers, to others who thought it was terrible to have any security presence in the building. So in that instance, I believed wholeheartedly, and I still do, that the security personnel were a critical enhancement to the school district, and pay for themselves many times over when you have one single incident in which they're helpful to a kid. I believe wholeheartedly that in all of the projects that we've presented. So acrimony and emotion sometimes is just it's part of the territory, and hopefully, regardless of the outcome, once we get to the other side of April 21st, the emotions will cool down a little bit, and everyone will work together in one direction or the other.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up, because speaking about the discord in the township and the borough and all these people pro and against, before getting elected to this board, I didn't realize what it was like until being on the board, so I can, quote unquote, feel your pain. And, with change comes challenges, and some people like it, some people don't like it. And it's the cost of doing business, so to speak. But ultimately, I think what you presented tonight and what you've been articulating over the past several weeks, you're talking about an investment in our children's future. I think ultimately that's an investment in Chatham's future. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Mike.
Mayor, can I have a follow-up question too? Can I have another question?
A quick one, I hope, because we have some officers here who've been waiting a long time to get promoted.
I want to commend you too for coming tonight, and I know every time I hear a presentation or log on to the website and look at the graphics, I learn something. One area where I'm still foggy on is the repurposing of the Chatham Middle School. And if you could, I've seen the floor plan for it that's on the website, but answers that I haven't heard said, and maybe it's because I've missed them, but I presume you have to level off the floor because it's an auditorium with a sloping floor. I presume since it's roughly 3 stories high in volume, that something is going to have to be done to convert that to just the one one floor plan that's the one floor bringing down a drop ceiling. Okay, and then the fact that it has no windows at this point, is there anything in the plan and in the budget to address that, or is that the way it's going to be, or?
Well, what we have in our presentations and online are preliminary sketches, so if the referendum were to pass, that's when we get into the rolling up the sleeves design phase. So I don't know if we'll have any skylights or things like that. I wouldn't anticipate it. We do have to level off the floor. It's about a 2-story, building. I wouldn't say it's 3 quite. So drop ceilings would be part of it. There are some STEM-related facilities where it's helpful to have a higher ceiling because of certain machinery and ventilation units and things like that you might have. The windowless issue is not, for us, it's not an issue. We have plenty of classrooms in the district and many, many office spaces that are windowless now, including a couple of computer labs at the high school. So that's not something that is of concern to us.
I mean, I think that many aspects of what's proposed are definite improvements at the STEM projects, the emphasis on the performing arts. I think they really are commendable. I guess I just hear that kind of a description, and I ask myself whether the right solution has been found to deliver that desired goal, to wall off effectively, although it's ceilinged off a major portion of your space. It just strikes me as being something that nobody would ever do in remodeling their own home. That if you had a portion of your home that wasn't functioning to your satisfaction and you had to build a new addition, you'd never build a new addition and then just wall off something that was non-functional, like the auditorium is for the school district. So it just strikes me as being a less than ideal solution to what is really a very real problem that you're trying to address.
It was with consultation with the architects to look at what were the possible solutions given what we wanted. And we think that this is the best solution to meet the goals that we have, and that remaining within that footprint of the auditorium has other challenges if you're trying to do it to improve the performing arts facilities in the district. So that's how we arrived at the solution that we have.
Mike, Matt, thank you very much. I just want to point out that no, that's okay. There is another Board of Education meeting on April 6th, and certainly anyone in the public who has questions can attend that meeting and talk to raise those issues again at the Board of Ed meeting, or to email you yourself, Mike, or members of the board with any questions in advance. So there'll be more dialogue about this. Ultimately, the voters will have a say, which is always a good thing, and that's on April 21st. So thank you again both for coming tonight. It was well presented. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.